The day my twin tried to live my life. I didn't almost lose my wedding at the altar. I lost it on cold bathroom tile with a locked door, a pair of nail scissors, and my sister wearing my face. It started at Sunday dinner when I told everyone David and I were engaged. Emma burst into tears so dramatic the silverware chimed. She'd just been dumped, 5th breakup that year, and when she leaned over to admire my ring, something behind her eyes shifted. After that, she watched me like I was a YouTube tutorial. How I gesture, the clothes I choose, even the way I sign my emails. At first it felt sisterly. Then she got my exact haircut and asked for my skincare step by step. I walked in on her practicing my smile in the mirror and couldn't move for a full minute. When the guy named Tom flirted with her and then bailed after she snapped at a waitress. For forgetting a straw, she recalibrated, then saw him hit on me at my office party a week later. That's when she stopped copying inspiration and started doing homework. Homework looked like my calls recorded without my consent. I love your laugh, she said, playing them back at 2 a.m. And a folder on her laptop labeled innocently, stuffed with color-coded spreadsheets documenting me and David. Pet names, inside jokes, dates, habits, like she was mapping our DNA. When I tried to get my family to intervene, Emma cried first. Why is Sarah making me feel crazy? My parents lectured me about being kind and stopped just short of calling me a bridezilla. Then she started showing up at my office pretending to be me. David texted me, can't believe we ran into each other, made my day, except I was at home. She'd gone to his office, wore my perfume, and let him kiss her before security could recognize the mix-up in their building. When I told David, he rubbed my back and said I must be stressed forgetting things. He said I'd eaten half his sandwich that day. I hadn't even seen him. That's how good she'd gotten. She'd planted ordinary memories to make me doubt myself. Even my mom went a bit pale when I showed her the messages. We'll get Emma evaluated, she promised. 6 months later, on my wedding morning, Emma showed up early with champagne and strawberries. Her hands shook. You need bubbles, she chirped, topping off my glass over and over. You'll glow in photos. The room went soft around the edges. When I realized she'd brought my dress in a separate bag, I tried to ask why. My tongue wouldn't shape words. Try not to panic, she said lightly, like a flight attendant during turbulence. I've practiced everything. She listed intimate details no one else should know and watched my face as the world turned sideways. I slipped under. I came to on the bathroom floor, drenched in cold water and locked in from the outside. Through the door, my mother's laugh, David's voice, and mine. Except it was Emma. Perfect pitch, perfect cadence. She'd thought of everything. My phone gone, the window painted shut. I hacked at the paint seam with nail scissors until my hands bled. When the lock clicked and she stepped in, already zipped into my dress, she set the shower to a thin stream. Stay awake, she said softly, almost tender. I want you to see. When she left, I picked the door with a bobby pin and staggered out, soaked and shaking. The sweet phone cord had been snipped. I followed the carpet's pattern like breadcrumbs to the stairwell, down to the lobby where the wedding party was taking pictures. I pointed to the bride in my dress and told a hotel staffer, that isn't me. He called security. Emma glided over, concerned big sister act on full blast. This is my twin, she told them gently. She isn't well. David's face said he wanted to believe me but couldn't find the handle. I tried the birthmark card. Emma countered with a story of me breaking into their bed. He nodded like he was filling in blank spaces with tidy lies just to make the scene make sense. They took me to a conference room. My mother guarded the door like I was a fireworks display too near a dry field. When she stepped out to help the photographer, I slipped down the hall, ducked into a supply closet, and put on a housekeeping uniform. It hung off me like a costume, but it was cover. I found our ballroom by following the white roses I'd chosen months ago. I tucked myself behind the service door. Bridesmaids floated down the aisle, then the flower girl, then David's nephew with the rings. The music swelled. Emma appeared on my father's arm. I'd planned to walk alone. Not everything she drilled was accurate. She gripped the bouquet like a baton I always cradle. Tiny tells, but they stacked. David began his vows, voice cracking in the places only I knew. When Emma's turn came, she did well for 30 seconds, then defaulted to greeting card romance. His brow creased. She paused too long, laughed nervously, and insisted she was just emotional. The officiant moved them along. A caterer slipped through the service door, and I asked him to tell the coordinator there was a problem with the bride. He did. The coordinator approached the altar, whispering. Emma stiffened. A ring slipped from her fingers and pinged across the floor like a gunshot. I stepped closer to help. David's eyes met mine. Recognition flared, then confusion. He looked from me to the woman in my dress and back again. They moved to the unity candle, David's family tradition. His nana had taught us the words in Italian the week before. Emma lifted her taper like she knew what came next. She didn't. Silence pressed on the room. I mouthed the phrase from the aisle. David went still. His grandmother shook her head, no longer hiding her disapproval. He set his candle down. The air changed. Tell me about our first date, he said to the woman beside him. Not the restaurant. What happened when the alarm went off and we got evacuated? Emma's lips moved, but nothing came out. She hadn't done the kind of homework you can't Google. Standing in a parking lot sharing breadsticks, laughing with soot on our sleeves while sprinklers drenched the hostess stand. That memory was ours. He walked to the officiant and quietly called it. The ceremony was postponed. The room erupted. Emma cracked. She shouted my name at the wrong person, and the slip split the facade wide open. Security escorted her out as she raged that I'd stolen her life. My parents looked at me like they were seeing me for the first time that day, really seeing me. 1,000 small things, how I hold David's hand, the curve of my shoulders, snapped back into place in their minds. We hid in the hotel garden until my hands stopped shaking. The sun dropped, and David held me like a fact. We decided not to force a wedding into that wreckage. We went back to our suite suite, ate room service fries in our borrowed clothes, and danced to our song on a tinny speaker. This, quiet, unperformed, was what she couldn't counterfeit. The morning after, the hotel manager brought security footage and asked about pressing charges. I said no. Emma was admitted voluntarily to a psychiatric facility. Words like delusional disorder and personality issues entered our vocabulary. I didn't want a court to supervise my grief. We dismantled the wedding piece by piece. Flowers were donated, deposits renegotiated. The photographer's images, gorgeous lies of Emma wearing me, were deleted. Our friends brought pizza and silence we didn't have to fill. My parents apologized for every time they'd brushed me off. They asked if I would visit Emma. I wasn't ready. David proposed again 3 weeks later over coffee. No audience, no violin cue. When you're ready, however you want, he said. I said yes before the kettle finished boiling. We got married at City Hall in a sundress and a borrowed tie. His grandmother cried through the paperwork and fed us enough pasta for 20. It was small and perfect and real. Emma sent a letter from the facility. The apology circled her own pain more than mine. The therapist warned me that empathy often arrives late in recovery. I didn't write back. A month later, she sent another note, shorter, steadier, about me instead of about fairness. I tucked it away for a future version of myself who might be able to receive it. We moved 2 hours away to a place with bright windows and no history. We changed the locks, painted walls in colors Emma never watched me choose, and learned the neighborhoods on foot. I started running. David learned the shape of my silences and brought tea without asking questions. We went to counseling, not because we were broken, but because our life deserved the kind of maintenance we hadn't known we'd need. A year passed. My parents said Emma was doing better in outpatient care. I wished her healing from a distance. Boundaries don't mean you don't care. They mean you've learned how to keep breathing. Some loose ends people always ask about. Why didn't I call the police? Because I wanted treatment, not headlines. Not everyone agrees with that choice. I can live with it. How did David know? It wasn't a single thing. It was 100 almost rights, bouquet grip, the kiss we'd planned to save, a family phrase in the wrong mouth, and one memory no one else could fake. What was Emma's tell for you? Watching her improvise my vows. I write like a fingerprint. Hers were smooth and empty. I still have the housekeeping uniform and the tiny scissors I used on the paint seal. They live in a drawer. They're just objects now. If you've read this, tell me, at what point would you have realized the person at the altar wasn't me? You asked for a deeper explanation, so here's the long, honest version, the how and why behind what happened, and the quieter mechanics underneath the chaos. I'll stay with the same thread you highlighted. Why he didn't see it sooner, why I chose boundaries over police, what Emma's letters meant and didn't, and how specificity beat performance when it mattered. People expect big revelations to arrive like explosions, but in real life they creep in as murmurs. David didn't miss the truth because he wasn't smart or because he didn't know me. He missed it because most of us trust the thing that looks right before we interrogate the thing that feels off. If you've ever lost your keys while holding them, you know the sensation. Your brain picks the most efficient story and sticks to it. On a wedding day, that instinct is amplified by 1,000 tiny pressures. The schedule, the family, the photos, the script. The person in a white dress is the bride. The person who's wet and shaking is the problem. It sounds unkind, but it's human. The obvious is quick. The gut whisper requires you to stop, and stopping is expensive in rooms designed to move you forward. He heard the wrongness, just not as a single scream. It slid in through small breaches. Vows that sounded purchased instead of written with the specificity I never resist. A kiss we'd agreed to save until after the pronouncement. Spent too early and too dramatic. A bouquet clutched at belly height when I always cradle it low because two-handed feels too formal. His grandmother's phrase in Italian turned flat, the music of it missing entirely. None of those were proof by themselves, but they layered, and layers change a picture. I don't blame him for needing time to add them up. He was trying to keep the ceremony's spine straight, trying to hold steady for everyone, and that's what love looks like too, until it stops being about steadiness and starts being about truth. The question he asked was perfect, not because it was clever, but because it was ours. What did we do when the alarm emptied the restaurant? It's the kind of memory no imposter can fetch from a hard drive because it lives in the small, unchoreographed mess of a real life. We didn't post about it. We didn't make a bit out of it for friends. We grabbed hot breadsticks with dripping sleeves and laughed at ourselves in a parking lot. There's nothing cinematic there. That's exactly why it saves you. In security language, you could call it two-factor authentication, but with heart. Not just something you know, but something you live together. It's a counterpoint to all the photos, captions, and routines someone can harvest if they're determined. Buried specificity is like an anti-copy watermark. It doesn't announce itself until you shine a certain light. I've been asked why I didn't call the police when I finally got my phone back, or when the manager came with security footage. The pragmatic answer is that I prioritized immediate safety and treatment over public justice. The emotional answer is that I was exhausted, violated, and not willing to hand my worst day to a system that might turn it into a spectacle I couldn't contain. There's room for disagreement here. Other people would have called. I don't believe there's a single moral high ground that fits every version of this story. Some choices you don't defend. You live with them. I wanted Emma kept away from me, evaluated, stabilized. I wanted distance. I didn't want a courtroom to become the second venue where my my life got argued by strangers. If that sounds like me choosing comfort, maybe. But comfort and care aren't the enemies of accountability. Sometimes they're the things that make long-haul accountability possible. Boundaries have a way of sounding like fences to people who've never needed them. For me, boundaries were bridges to a life that wasn't built around managing Emma's storms. They weren't about punishing her. They were about protecting the part of me that still jumped when the phone buzzed. Not responding to her letters wasn't a power move. It was me declining to re-enter a conversation I had never consented to in the first place, the one where my identity was negotiable. I kept the letters because they represented a future I might want, a future where the apology moves from performance into understanding, but I didn't let them set the timeline. Recovery often makes the person who did the harm the protagonist of the story. Treatment is about them, journals are about them, sessions are about them. That's good for their progress. It doesn't obligate me to step into the scene every time the therapist says, ready. The shape of Emma's apologies told me more than the words. The first letter spun like a planet around her own gravity, her feelings of invisibility, her loneliness, her pain. I understand why that happens. When someone is drowning, they describe water. The second letter was different. It was shorter, almost stark, and finally used language about the harm done instead of the harm felt. What she took from me more than what I had left her no choice but to want. I don't think apologies must be poetic to be real. They need to be accurate. They need to name what happened without smuggling in a defense. They need to leave room for the person harmed to say, thank you, not yet, or never, and mean any of those without being dragged back to court in the arena of family feelings. My parents walked a hard line. They had a daughter in a wedding dress and a daughter in a housekeeping uniform. A day that was supposed to be simple. A lifetime of sorting who's the peacemaker and who's the problem. Before the ceremony cracked, they chose the quickest story. I don't hate them for that. Their minds were protecting them from an unbearable truth. When the evidence arrived, when the phrase failed, the ring fell, and the name slipped, they adjusted. That recalibration hurts to remember, because it's where I felt both abandoned and rescued in the same hour. Now they report in colors. When they visit Emma, she paints in blue or red, she tries landscapes, she pauses before copying. I make space for that. Letting them love her isn't the same as letting her near me. You asked about David reading the stillness. This is the part I want to talk about the most because it doesn't get a soundtrack. After the hotel, he didn't make speeches about how he should have known, how no one will ever fool him again. He made tea without asking and turned off his own phone when mine blew up and answered exactly what needed answering. He learned to hear the difference between my quiet that wants company and my quiet that wants room. Sometimes love is fluency in someone's silence. I don't mean sainthood. He has his limits and we talk about them. We'll leave early if you need to. Doesn't mean you have to leave. It means I have options now that don't require me to break the night to keep myself safe. Let's talk about what fooled the room and what didn't, because that's where the real lesson hides. Crowds are built on speed, weddings especially. You're ushered, cued, photographed, seated, fed, clapped, and moved along. Quick pattern matching is a feature, not a flaw. Face looks right, hair looks right, voice sounds right, dress is white, done. In that environment, sameness wins. The only thing that slows it is specificity, which is inconvenient by definition. It asks you to pause and remember the way someone holds an object, which shoulder their bag slides off, whether they touch your elbow when they laugh or keep their hands folded. I had always thought those details were private and therefore unimportant to anyone else. It turns out they're the exact opposite. They're public but unnoticed, and therefore very hard to counterfeit. They live in bone and muscle, not clothing. They're not secrets, they're signatures. Emma wasn't a mustache-twirling villain. She was a meticulous performer who believed performance could become substance if she rehearsed hard enough. Spreadsheets, call recordings, scripts for small talk. It's chilling, but it's also sad because performance has to be observed to draw breath. Intimacy isn't impressed. It's not an audience. You can capture the words of a vow, but not the moment your partner's voice drops at a word only you two find funny. You can steal the dress. You can't steal the way your partner's fingers find the edge of your ring without looking. Under pressure, Emma reached for bigger gestures. Fainting, dramatic kisses, a voice pitched to reassure, because subtlety requires a reservoir of truth you can borrow from only if you've put the hours in. That's another reason he didn't see it instantly. Everything in that room rewarded volume. When she kissed him early, guests applauded. When she laughed the pause off, people smiled in relief. Our social circuits like closure. They reach for it even when the edges are jagged. He heard the edge and still tried.